Welcome to the Winchester Mystery House, a place of endless hallways, hidden secrets, and restless spirits. Tonight, we uncover what really happened inside. Dare to step in. The rain had been falling in a slow, deliberate drizzle for hours, slicking the narrow country roads and soaking the thick groves of eucalyptus that loomed like dark sentinels over the landscape. The late afternoon light was dying in streaks of orange and purple, casting long, creeping shadows over the fields that lay on the outskirts of San Jose. Claire Hawthorne pulled her car off the main road and onto the gravel drive marked by a wrought iron gate that was more rust than steel. The sign hanging from its top bar read simply, Winchester Mystery House. Even though she'd seen the house in pictures countless times before, nothing could have prepared her for the sheer size of the place as it revealed itself through the mist. The mansion didn't look real at first glance. It was a sprawling, asymmetrical mass of Victorian gables, turrets, and porches, rising and twisting as if it had grown organically rather than been constructed. There was no sense of order or balance to the architecture. Windows sat oddly against other windows. Doors opened onto second-story balconies with no railings, and entire wings appeared to jut off at angles that made no architectural sense. It looked like a place dreamed up in a fever. Claire turned off the engine and sat for a long moment in the quiet, staring at the darkened silhouette of the mansion against the stormy sky. She was not the sort of person who believed in haunted houses. She'd built her career as an investigative journalist on unraveling myths and debunking urban legends. But she couldn't deny that the Winchester place made her uneasy in a way she couldn't rationally explain. For the past 3 weeks, she had been following the threads of an old story, a story about something Sarah Winchester had left behind when she died, something hidden deep in the labyrinth of the house. According to the old blueprints, there were at least a dozen sealed-off rooms that had never been documented by historians or tour guides, rooms that might still be filled with artifacts untouched since the heiress's death. And there was one in particular, a chamber marked only by a strange insignia instead of a number. Claire stepped out into the rain and pulled her jacket tight around her shoulders. The caretaker was waiting for her at the front door. He was a gaunt man named Lewis, whose pale eyes barely seemed to blink. He didn't smile as he handed her a set of heavy iron keys. "These open the west wing," he said. "Stay out of the south corridors. They're not safe. Half the stairs in that section were never completed, and the floors are unreliable." His voice rasped like dry leaves, and Claire caught the faintest hint of warning in his tone. "I'm not here for the south wing," she said, forcing a confident smile. "I'm just interested in the west rooms. That's where the blueprints suggest." Lewis cut her off. "Blueprints mean nothing here. Mrs. Winchester changed her mind constantly. She'd have something built one day, torn down the next. Whole rooms got walled up while she was still in them. If you're looking for a straight path, you won't find one." Claire thanked him and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. The scent of aged wood dust, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers left in a forgotten vase. The entrance hall was warm compared to the cold rain outside, but the air was unnervingly still, like the house itself was holding its breath. Shadows clung to the intricate woodwork of the grand staircase, which curved upward to a landing lined with narrow doors. She'd seen photos of the staircase before. It was famous for its bizarre design, with some steps only a few inches high and others far taller, forcing anyone climbing it to move in an awkward, halting rhythm. Claire clicked on her flashlight. The beam swept across the ornate wallpaper patterned with curling vines, over dusty furniture draped in moth-eaten sheets, and finally landed on a door at the far end of the hall. It was marked with the number 13, carved directly into the wood. That wasn't unusual for this house. Sarah Winchester had been obsessed with the number. But when Claire tried the key, she found it didn't fit. She tried again, this time with a smaller key, and the lock clicked. The door opened onto a corridor, so narrow it felt more like a tunnel. The wall seemed to lean inward, and the ceiling dipped so low she had to duck her head. As she moved deeper inside, the sound of the rain outside faded until it was replaced by something else. A soft, rhythmic creaking, as if the house was shifting its weight in the wind. Claire told herself it was just old wood settling. But then she noticed the faint smell of smoke. The corridor twisted left, then right, and she began to lose track of the direction she had come from. She passed staircases that climbed into ceilings with no openings, doors that opened into blank walls, and one set of steps that ended abruptly in a sheer drop to the floor below. The house seemed intent on confusing her, its passageways folding in on themselves like a maze. She finally came to a stop before a small door tucked behind a massive armoire. It was barely 4 feet high, and when she pushed the armoire aside and crouched to open it, she realized she was trembling. There was something about the way the door was concealed, as though it had been deliberately hidden. She hesitated, listening. The creaking had stopped. The silence pressed in on her. She turned the handle. The door opened into a room no larger than a closet. Dust motes swirled in the beam of her flashlight. The walls were lined with old shelves, but most were empty. Only one item remained, a tarnished brass key, lying in the center of the floor. Claire stepped inside and knelt to pick it up. The moment her fingers closed around the key, the air seemed to change. A sudden chill swept through the room, and the door slammed shut behind her with a force that rattled the shelves. She spun around and tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then she heard it, a whisper, so soft it could have been her imagination. "Find the sealed chamber." Claire's breath caught in her throat. She whirled, scanning the room with her flashlight. "Who's there?" There was no answer. But somewhere beyond the thin walls, the sound of footsteps began to echo through the house. Slow, deliberate, growing closer. She tightened her grip on the brass key. She had no idea what it unlocked, but she was certain of one thing now. She was not alone in the Winchester Mystery House, and the house wasn't going to let her go easily. Claire pressed her ear against the door, her breath catching with each muffled step that echoed through the labyrinthine halls beyond. The steps didn't sound hurried, but there was an intention behind them, a steady rhythm that grew louder and closer with every beat. Her flashlight beam trembled across the walls as she searched for another way out. But the tiny room held no windows, no trap doors, nothing but those bare shelves and the suffocating sense that the walls themselves were leaning in toward her. The whisper lingered in her head, "Find the sealed chamber." She crouched, scanning the baseboards with the light. There was something odd about one section of the wall to her right. Its wood grain didn't match the rest. Setting the flashlight down, she pressed her hands against it. It felt hollow beneath her palm. She shoved hard, and the panel shifted just enough to reveal a gap, maybe a foot wide. Claire hesitated. She didn't like the idea of crawling blindly into an unknown passage, but the steps were nearly outside the door now. Whoever it was, she didn't want to be there when they arrived. She shoved the flashlight into her jacket pocket, dropped to her knees, and squeezed herself into the narrow opening. The passage was pitch black. Dust coated her hands and knees as she crawled forward, her shoulders scraping against the walls. The air was close and suffocating, smelling of rot and something older, metallic. She forced herself to move faster, pushing deeper into the tunnel until the sound of footsteps grew faint. She told herself she was safe now, but the silence was worse somehow. She emerged into another corridor, this one wider, but just as warped and crooked as the last. Claire stood slowly, brushing off the dust, and pulled the brass key from her pocket. Its surface was engraved with a strange pattern of interlocking circles. She had no idea what lock it was meant for, but something told her it mattered. The corridor ended at two doors. One stood slightly ajar, and a faint draft carried the scent of smoke through the crack. Claire approached it slowly, nudging it open with her foot. The room beyond was a parlor, or at least it had been decades ago. A grand fireplace dominated one wall, cold and empty now. Sheet-covered furniture sagged in the corners, and faded paintings hung crooked on the walls. Claire stepped inside, sweeping her flashlight around. She froze when the beam landed on a figure in the far corner. It was a mannequin. She exhaled a shaky laugh. But as she approached, she realized it wasn't like any mannequin she'd seen before. Its face was carved with uncanny detail, every wrinkle and crease etched into the pale wood. Its glassy eyes stared straight ahead, and its hands were positioned as though gripping something invisible. A nameplate at its feet read, "Sarah." Claire swallowed. "Great," she muttered. "That's not creepy at all." She was about to turn away when she noticed the figure's left hand. Something glinted between its wooden fingers. Carefully, she pried them apart and freed a thin slip of paper. It was a map. At least, it looked like a map, though it was nearly impossible to decipher. The lines twisted and doubled back on themselves, and the labels were written in a looping script she didn't recognize. One symbol matched the one engraved on the brass key. She was still staring at the map when a soft creak sounded behind her. Claire turned slowly, flashlight raised. The parlor door was swinging shut. She lunged forward, but it was too late. The door slammed with a force that rattled the walls. Then she heard the footsteps again, closer this time, echoing directly outside the room. Claire backed away from the door. "Hello?" she called, though her voice cracked halfway through. There was no answer. Only the sound of the footsteps moving slowly down the hall, stopping just outside. She realized, with a cold dread spreading through her chest, that she couldn't tell if they belonged to one person or many. The footsteps ceased. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, a bell began to toll. Claire flinched at the sound. It was low and resonant, vibrating through the floorboards beneath her feet. Once, twice, 3 times it rang, until she lost count. She clutched the map and the key tighter, her heart pounding. She knew instinctively that the tolling marked something, a shift in the house. Whether it was good or bad, she couldn't tell. And then she saw it, a shadow slipping beneath the door. It didn't move like a normal shadow. It was thicker, darker, writhing as though alive. Claire stumbled back, her breath coming in panicked gasps. The shadow stretched upward, filling the edges of the doorframe. She didn't think. She ran to the fireplace, her flashlight beam darting wildly across the mantel. There, a narrow hatch near the hearth, hidden behind a decorative grate. She yanked it open and crawled inside just as the door to the parlor began to creak open. The tunnel she'd entered was even tighter than the last, sloping downward into the bowels of the house. She scrambled forward, heart hammering in her ears, and dared a glance behind her. The parlor was empty, but she could still see the shadow. It was crawling into the tunnel after her. Claire forced herself to move faster, the map clutched between her teeth and the brass key digging into her palm. The tunnel twisted and branched, and she made choices at random, turning left, then right, until her knees and elbows were scraped raw. She could hear the shadow gaining, a low hiss growing louder with each second. She rounded another corner, and slammed face first into a wooden wall. "No," she gasped. "No, no, no." She pounded on the wood with both fists, but there was no give. Behind her, the shadow was almost upon her. Claire jammed the brass key into the wall, hoping for a hidden lock, but it scraped uselessly across the wood. Then, as if in answer, the wall shuddered and split open, revealing a narrow stairway leading down into darkness. Claire didn't hesitate. She flung herself down the stairs, pulling the door shut behind her. And when she reached the bottom, she found herself in a vast chamber that couldn't possibly fit within the dimensions of the house above. It was filled with hundreds of doors. Every wall, every corner, even the ceiling was lined with them. Some were ornate and gilded, others plain and weathered, but all of them were shut tight. And every single one bore the same symbol as the key in her hand. Claire stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, her breath shallow as she tried to comprehend the impossible sight before her. Hundreds, no, perhaps thousands, of doors stretched upward and outward, lining the cavernous chamber like a cathedral of portals. Some were intricately carved with twisting vines and angelic faces. They were still polished as if they had been built yesterday. Others were splintered and blackened, the paint peeling in flakes that rained softly to the stone floor. A chill swept through the chamber, carrying a scent of damp earth and something far older, something that smelled like the dust of forgotten graves. She stepped forward slowly, her boots echoing in the emptiness. The chamber felt vast enough to be endless, yet the air was thick, heavy with the sense of being watched. She gripped the brass key tightly, the engraved circles pressing into her skin. Every door bore that same symbol at its center, as if mocking her with the promise that she could open any of them, if she dared. "Sarah Winchester," Claire whispered to herself, her voice swallowed instantly by the cavernous silence. "What the hell did you build down here?" The map crinkled in her pocket as she pulled it out, unfolding it carefully. Its spidery lines seemed to shift and twist under her flashlight beam, almost alive. Claire squinted, following the looping marks until one circle at the far corner caught her eye. The symbol matched the key, but it was different, darker, etched with a small black dot at its center. It wasn't labeled like the others. "That's it," Claire murmured. "The sealed chamber." She began walking, using the map as her guide, though it was nearly impossible to orient herself. Each direction she turned seemed to lead to more doors, their placement changing subtly when she looked away. Twice she swore the chamber itself had elongated, doors sliding farther away like mirages in the desert. Her nerves frayed with each step, but she pressed on, scanning for any sign of the marked chamber. Then the whisper returned. "Closer!" Claire froze, the map trembling in her hands. "Who's there?" The answer came from all around her, layered voices speaking in harmony. "Find it, or be trapped forever." She spun in place, the flashlight darting frantically over the doors. Every symbol glowed faintly now, a sickly white pulse that throbbed in time with her own heartbeat. Claire backed up slowly, clutching the key. "I don't want to be trapped," she whispered. The floor beneath her feet shifted. She gasped as the ground split into jagged cracks, narrow fissures opening to reveal blackness beneath. One by one, the doors began to rattle violently in their frames. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of ancient wood and rusted hinges. Dust rained down from above as the entire chamber seemed to quake. Claire broke into a run. She didn't know if she was following the map anymore, only that she had to keep moving. Doors slammed open as she passed, revealing brief, terrible glimpses of what lay beyond, an endless forest at night, a room filled with flickering candles and skeletal figures bowed in prayer, a vast ocean with waves roaring in unnatural silence. Each time she nearly stopped, transfixed, but the whispers urged her forward. "Faster!" She stumbled, catching herself against a cold, iron-bound door. It was massive, larger than any of the others, and its symbol was etched so deep into the wood it seemed burned into it. The black dot at the center pulsed faintly. Claire fumbled with the key, her hands slick with sweat. The lock was unlike any she had ever seen, a jagged maw that seemed to resist her attempts to fit the key. When it finally slid in, the chamber went utterly silent. She turned the key. The door swung inward with a groan that reverberated through the entire house. The chamber beyond was small and bare, its walls plain stone. At the center stood a single object, an antique wooden desk, its surface covered with yellowed papers, and a tarnished lantern still burning faintly. Dust coated everything, yet the flame in the lantern flickered as if it had been lit moments ago. Claire stepped inside cautiously. "This is it," she whispered. The whispers had gone silent, but the air felt electric, thick with unseen energy. She set the map on the desk and rifled through the papers. They were letters, all in Sarah Winchester's distinctive looping handwriting. Most were incoherent, rambling about atonement and the restless dead, but one caught Claire's attention immediately. It read, "They will never forgive me. The house is their prison, their refuge, and their weapon. I build not for my safety, but for the world's. Should the doors be opened, the dead will pour through, and all will be lost. If you have found this place, stranger, it is already too late. You will see them soon." Claire's hand shook as she set the letter down. She didn't understand, not fully, but she knew enough to be afraid. A faint sound drew her gaze to the corner of the room. The shadow was there. It was no longer amorphous. It had taken shape, a figure draped in darkness, its face an indistinct void. It stepped forward soundlessly, and the air grew colder with every movement. Claire backed up, fumbling with the key. "Stay away from me." The figure tilted its head as if amused. Then it raised one skeletal hand and pointed at the desk. Claire turned slowly. The lantern flame had grown brighter, casting harsh light across the stone walls. She saw, for the first time, the dozens of symbols carved into the stone, identical to the ones on the doors outside. And at the center, directly above the desk, was a new carving. It was a doorway, a real one. And as the light from the lantern flared blindingly, Claire saw the shadows of countless figures pressing against it from the other side. The whisper came again, louder than ever. "Open the way!" Claire's instinct screamed at her to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She stared at the door etched into the stone, at the hundreds of shadowy hands now clawing at the invisible barrier. She knew with a sick certainty that if she used the key here, she would unleash whatever Sarah Winchester had spent her life trying to contain. But the figure in the corner was closing in, and she had nowhere left to run. She lifted the key toward the carving. The stone groaned. And then she heard a voice, not a whisper this time, but a clear, desperate cry. "Don't open it!" Claire spun around, nearly dropping the key. A woman stood in the doorway, the same doorway Claire had entered through only moments ago. She was pale, with tangled dark hair and clothing that looked decades out of date. Her wide eyes fixed on the key in Claire's hand. "Please," the woman begged, stepping closer. "That's what it wants you to do." Claire's heart pounded. "Who are you?" The woman shook her head. "There's no time. You need to leave now, before it's too late." Behind her, the shadow figure had stopped moving. It seemed to be watching the woman as much as Claire. But the whisper returned, curling around Claire's thoughts like smoke. "She's lying. Only you can end this. Open the way." Claire looked between them, the weight of the key dragging in her hand. "What happens if I open it?" she asked. The woman's face twisted with fear. "The dead will be free. The house will consume you. Everyone you've ever known will be at risk. Don't you understand? That's why Sarah built this place, to keep them contained." The shadow moved closer again, silent, relentless. Claire realized she had only seconds to decide, and she didn't know who to trust. Claire's hand trembled as she held the key inches from the carved stone door, her mind spinning. The shadow figure loomed closer, its faceless head cocked to one side, as if savoring the tension. The strange woman stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't let it out. That's what it's been trying to make you do. That's what it's done to all the others." Claire's breath caught. "Others?" The woman nodded slowly. "You think you're the first? You think you're the only one the house has lured here? It calls to people like you, people who can open the doors. It feeds on curiosity, on desperation. But if you open that seal, there will be nothing left to stop them. This house is the only thing standing between their world and ours." The whisper returned, insistent, curling through Claire's thoughts. "She's lying. She's part of it. Do you think she looks alive to you?" Claire turned her flashlight toward the woman, and for a split second, she saw the truth. The woman's feet didn't touch the ground. Her face flickered like a candle flame, translucent and pale, her features sharpening into something skeletal before softening again. Claire stumbled back, clutching the key tighter. "What are you?" The woman's expression twisted with sorrow. "I'm what happens if you stay here too long." The shadow figure stepped forward, and the temperature in the chamber plummeted. Frost began to creep up the stone walls, spiderwebbing over the carved symbols. The door in the wall pulsed faintly, the shadows of hundreds of hands pushing harder from the other side, their silent screams vibrating through the air. Claire's instinct screamed at her to run, but the only way out was past the ghostly woman. The woman reached toward her, her voice breaking. "If you want to live, don't trust the house. Don't trust it." The shadow lunged. Claire dropped the key. It clattered across the stone floor as she dove aside, rolling behind the desk just as the shadow struck. The air exploded with an icy gust, and for a moment she thought it had grabbed her. But when she looked up, the ghostly woman had stepped between them. She raised her translucent arms and screamed. The sound was piercing, almost inhuman, a high keening wail that made the very walls tremble. The shadow recoiled, shrinking back toward the corner of the room as the woman advanced. "Go!" she shouted to Claire, her voice overlapping with that terrible wail. "Get out while you still can!" Claire didn't hesitate. She scrambled across the floor, snatched up the brass key, and sprinted for the doorway. But when she stepped into the chamber of doors again, it was different. The doors had moved. They no longer lined the walls in neat, if chaotic, rows. Now they floated in the air, spinning slowly like leaves caught in an invisible current. Some drifted upward into the black void above. Others crashed violently against each other, splintering into fragments. The floor beneath Claire's feet groaned and shifted like a living thing. She clutched the key to her chest and forced herself forward, weaving through the floating doors. One swung open as she passed, revealing a vision of a burned-out battlefield, the corpses of soldiers strewn like discarded dolls. Another door burst open, and she glimpsed a stormy ocean, the waves rising unnaturally high as if to swallow her whole. She knew better than to look too long. The house was trying to distract her, to tempt her into stepping through one of those doors and vanishing forever. She focused on the map, though its lines seemed to blur and rearrange every time she glanced at it. The chamber was shifting around her, rearranging itself like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Claire gritted her teeth and picked a direction, running as fast as she dared. The whispers followed her. "Come back! Open the way! You can end it all!" She stumbled over a loose board, nearly falling through a gap that had opened in the floor. Below was nothing but blackness, a void that seemed to swallow light itself. She pulled herself back up, gasping, and pressed onward. Finally, she saw a door that looked different. It wasn't floating like the others, and it wasn't marked with the house's familiar symbol. Instead, its surface was smooth, featureless, and faintly glowing. Claire reached it just as the whispers rose to a deafening roar. She shoved it open. The world shifted. She was no longer in the chamber of doors. She was in a hallway, a familiar one. Claire blinked, disoriented, as she realized she was back on the main floor of the house, in the same corridor where she had first entered. The rain outside was louder now, hammering the windows like fists. The hallway was darker than she remembered. The wallpaper was peeling, and the once ornate light fixtures hung askew. Something about the house felt heavier now, as though the walls themselves were sagging with age. "Claire!" The voice came from behind her. She turned slowly. At the end of the hallway stood a figure. Not the shadow, not the ghostly woman, but a third presence, this one solid, dressed in an old-fashioned morning gown. Her veil hung low over her face, but Claire recognized the way she carried herself instantly. Sarah Winchester. Claire breathed. The figure raised her head, revealing a face that was pale and gaunt, her eyes dark and hollow. "You've seen too much," Sarah said softly, her voice a brittle whisper. Claire took a step back. I just want to get out of here. Please, I won't tell anyone." Sarah tilted her head. "Do you think the house will let you go?" Claire opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Sarah moved closer, the train of her gown whispering over the warped floorboards. "I built this place to contain them, child. Every nail, every brick, every stairway to nowhere. It was all for a purpose. But the house, it's alive now. It has learned to feed. It doesn't care who you are. If it keeps you, it keeps you." Claire's voice finally returned, though it was barely more than a whisper. "How do I stop it?" Sarah's eyes glimmered faintly. "You can't, but you can choose. You can open the way and set them free." Claire's heart pounded. "And if I don't?" Sarah looked past her, toward the darkness creeping along the hallway floor like a living tide. "Then it will take you instead." Claire turned and saw it, the shadows spilling from the walls and ceiling, filling the corridor like ink and water. She ran. Her feet pounded the warped boards as she sprinted through the twisting halls. Doors slammed shut in front of her, forcing her to change direction again and again. The house was playing with her now, guiding her deeper into its maze. The whispers grew louder, blending into a cacophony of voices. Claire clutched the brass key tightly, knowing it was the only thing she had. She didn't know where she was running anymore. She only knew she couldn't stop. And then she saw it, a staircase leading upward into a tower she had never seen before. Claire didn't hesitate. She took the stairs two at a time, her legs burning, until she reached the top. The tower room was circular, its walls lined with windows that looked out onto the storm. At its center stood a single door. She froze. The symbol on the door was different this time. It wasn't the Winchester symbol. It was a symbol she didn't recognize. A circle with a jagged slash through it, almost like a warning. The whispers fell silent. Claire approached the door slowly, the key shaking in her hand. Somewhere below her, she heard the house groan, and the sound of the shadows surging upward through the stairwell. She had seconds to decide. Either go through the door and risk whatever waited beyond, or be devoured by the house. Claire took a deep breath, slid the key into the lock, and turned it. The door swung open, and the darkness on the other side was absolute. She stepped through. Claire's foot hovered mid-step as she crossed the threshold into the pitch-black void beyond the door. There was no floor that she could see, no walls, no sound but the rush of blood in her ears. Yet something, an unseen pull, guided her forward. She took a cautious step, expecting to fall, but her boot landed on something solid. Another step, then another. It was as though she was walking on air, suspended in a space that had no end. Behind her, the door she'd entered through slammed shut with a thunderous echo, leaving her alone in the darkness. She whirled around and reached for the door handle, but it had vanished completely. "Hello?" Claire's voice cracked, swallowed instantly by the void. "Is anyone here?" The answer came as a low rumble, a vibration she felt deep in her bones. It wasn't words exactly, but she understood the intent. "Keep going." Claire tightened her grip on the brass key and moved forward, each step tentative. After what felt like an eternity, she began to see faint points of light ahead, like distant stars. She quickened her pace, drawn toward them, until she realized with a jolt that they weren't stars at all. They were windows. Hundreds, thousands of windows suspended in the darkness, each one glowing faintly. Some were round, some square, others shaped like cathedral arches, but all hovered in midair, unconnected to any walls or structure. Claire approached one cautiously, peering through the glass. What she saw made her stomach drop. It was her apartment. Not a vision, not a memory. The apartment as it was right now. Her coffee mug still sat on the counter where she'd left it this morning, a half-finished article glowing faintly on her laptop screen. She reached out and touched the glass, and the image flickered. She could almost smell the faint scent of her coffee, hear the hum of the refrigerator. "Home," she whispered, her voice breaking. The whispers returned, louder now, curling around her like tendrils. "Go through, go through." She hesitated, pressing her hand flat against the window. If she stepped through, could she go home? Could she escape the house once and for all? But then she noticed something. In the far corner of the apartment, just barely visible, was a shadow. Not a normal shadow. It was watching her. Claire stumbled back, her heart pounding. The shadow didn't move, didn't advance. It just stood there, patient, knowing she had nowhere else to go. The whisper shifted, mocking now. "Do you want to let it in? Do you want it waiting for you at home?" Claire forced herself to turn away from the window. She looked at the others, one by one, and realized they showed different places. A hospital room where machines beeped steadily around an empty bed. A school hallway, its lockers dented and rusting. A family dining room filled with the ghostly echoes of people long gone. Each window was a doorway. Each one was a trap. Claire clutched the key tighter. "Not yet," she whispered. She pushed deeper into the void, weaving through the floating windows. The further she went, the darker it became. Some windows hung broken and shattered, their glass edges glowing faintly like dying embers. Others were boarded shut from the inside, as though whatever was beyond them didn't want to be seen. She felt the house closing in. Not the physical house, the presence of it, vast and ancient, stretching beyond the limits of the mansion she had entered. This place wasn't just a building. It was a labyrinth of realities, a cage for things that should never have been. And she was walking straight into its heart. Eventually, Claire reached the largest window of all. It was a towering arch of blackened glass, and behind it lay a room unlike any she had seen before. It was a throne room. Massive stone pillars rose into shadow, and a single throne sat at the far end, carved from black marble and inlaid with silver. The figure seated upon it was cloaked in darkness, its head bowed. Claire's breath caught. "Sarah!" As if in answer, the figure stirred. It lifted its head slowly, revealing a face that was not Sarah Winchester's. It wasn't human at all. Its features shifted constantly, blurring between faces, young, old, male, female, and things that were none of those. Its eyes burned with a pale, unnatural light. "You?" The voice that came from it was deep and resonant, layered with 100 tones. "Have the key." Claire stepped back instinctively, her knuckles white around the brass key. Who are you? The figure rose from the throne. It was impossibly tall, its movements fluid and deliberate. I am what she built this prison for. It said, I am what you would call the first. I was there when Sarah's sins awakened us. She thought she could contain me, contain us, but all she did was make us stronger. Every door she built was another gateway, another feeding ground. And now you hold the one thing that can release me. Claire shook her head. You're lying. Sarah built this house to keep you trapped. The figure stepped closer, and the glass of the window vibrated from its presence. Trapped? Do you not see the truth, child? This house isn't a prison. It is a harvest. Every soul it lures here, every death within its walls, makes me stronger. And when you open the way, I will be free to consume everything beyond it. Claire's stomach turned. Then I'll destroy the key. The figure's shifting face contorted into something like a smile. Try. It will do you no good. The key is part of you now, bound to your soul. There is no leaving without it, and there is no leaving with it. There is only me and the house. The whisper swelled, filling the void, urging her to step through the window. Claire backed away, shaking her head. No, I won't set you free. The figure's voice turned cold. Then the house will take you as it has taken the others, and you will serve me regardless. The windows around Claire shattered one by one, spilling their glowing shards into the darkness. The ground beneath her feet began to crumble. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that the void was collapsing around her. Windows exploded into nothingness as the throne room faded behind her. The whispers were deafening now, rising to a frenzy. Open the way! Open the way! Claire spotted a flicker of light ahead, a doorway, glowing faintly. She threw herself toward it, leaping just as the ground disintegrated beneath her. She crashed through the door and landed hard on her hands and knees. When she looked up, she was back in the Winchester house. But it wasn't the same house she had entered. The walls were cracked and rotting, the ceiling sagging as if centuries had passed. The air was filled with the stench of decay, and the shadow was waiting for her. It filled the hallway ahead, stretching floor to ceiling, its faceless head tilting in silent mockery. Claire scrambled to her feet, the key still clutched in her fist. She could feel it vibrating now, as though it was alive, its energy pulling her toward the shadow. She backed up, her breath ragged. I'm not opening the way, she whispered. The shadows surged forward. Claire turned and ran, the walls of the house groaning as if they might collapse at any second. She had no map this time, no idea where she was going. But as she rounded a corner, she saw something that made her stop cold. A door. Not just any door, the same door she had seen carved into the stone in the sealed chamber. The door Sarah had warned her about. It pulsed faintly, calling to the key in her hand. And she realized, with sick certainty, that this was the endgame. Either open the door and unleash the dead, or let the house claim her. She could already hear the shadow closing in, its presence like a crushing weight behind her. Claire took one shaking breath, raised the key, and slid it into the lock. The door swung open, and the darkness on the other side screamed. Claire staggered back as the door swung open, the darkness within surging outward like a living storm. The sound was indescribable, a chorus of screams, whispers, and guttural roars that pressed against her skull until she thought her head would split. The shadow that had been pursuing her stopped at the threshold, writhing as if in ecstasy, its featureless form drinking in the energy spilling from the open portal. The ground shook violently. Pieces of the ceiling crashed down around her, sending clouds of choking dust into the air. The house was unraveling. Claire's instinct screamed at her to run through the doorway, to escape the collapsing halls, but she hesitated. She could see shapes moving in the darkness beyond the door. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them. They clawed at the edges of the portal, their faces a twisted mass of anguish and hunger. The whispers flooded her mind, louder than ever. "Step through, be free, open the way!" "No!" she screamed, clutching the brass key so tightly the edges dug into her palm. But the shadows surged toward her, pushing her closer to the open door. Claire stumbled, barely catching herself on the warped frame. The figures on the other side reached for her, their hands skeletal, their eyes glowing with a hollow, predatory light. In that moment, she understood. Sarah Winchester had built this house as both prison and decoy. Every door, every staircase to nowhere, every hidden chamber was designed to confuse and contain, to keep the restless dead locked away and starved of the living world. But the house itself had become infected, feeding on those it lured inside, growing stronger with every life it consumed. If the door remained open, the dead would pour out, and the world would become their feeding ground. She had one chance. Claire turned to face the shadow, the key raised like a weapon. The thing paused, as if startled, and she felt a flicker of power surge through the brass in her hand. It wasn't just a key, it was a seal. "Not today," she whispered. She drove the key into the edge of the doorframe. The reaction was instantaneous. Light erupted from the lock, blinding and pure, searing through the darkness like a blade. The shadow let out a soundless scream as the energy ripped through it, shredding its form into tatters. The figures beyond the doorway shrieked in unison, their clawing hands retreating as if burned. Claire twisted the key. The door slammed shut with a force that threw her backward. The ground bucked beneath her, the walls of the Winchester house twisting and groaning as if in agony. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling, and the floor opened in jagged fissures that threatened to swallow her whole. She ran. The hallway shifted around her, staircases collapsing, doors vanishing before she could reach them. It was like sprinting through a nightmare. The whispers had turned into howls of rage, the house itself lashing out at her, as if it knew she had stolen something from it. Claire reached the grand staircase just as it began to crumble. She launched herself down the steps, the rotting wood splintering under her boots, and burst through the front doors into the storm outside. Rain pelted her face as she staggered into the overgrown gardens. She turned back once, just in time to see the house convulse like a wounded beast. Windows shattered, towers collapsed, and a roar like a hurricane filled the air as the entire structure imploded inward, sucked into itself until there was nothing left but a crater where the mansion had once stood. Then silence. Claire collapsed to her knees in the mud, gasping for breath. Her clothes were soaked, her body bruised and aching, but she was alive. She opened her hand. The brass key lay in her palm, its once bright surface now dull and cracked. She knew, with a heavy certainty, that it would never open another door again. "Sarah," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "I hope that's enough." A faint breeze stirred, carrying with it the scent of dust and roses. For a moment, she thought she heard a woman's voice, soft, distant, full of gratitude. Then it was gone. Claire stood slowly, her legs trembling. She glanced back one last time at the crater where the Winchester Mystery House had stood, and for the first time since she had arrived, she felt no whispers, no unseen eyes watching her. It was over. Or so she thought. As she turned to leave, the brass key in her hand pulsed faintly, one last flicker of light glowing in the cracks. Claire froze, staring at it, and from somewhere deep within the earth, beneath the ruins of the house, she heard it. A single, hollow knock. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Winchester Mystery House, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next chilling story. What do you think really happened in that house? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, some doors are better left closed.